I think one way to get started with Chapter 1 is to look at the title of the chapter, Appearance and Reality, and then think of that in relation to the opening question. Is there any knowledge in the world which is so certain that no reasonable man could doubt it? What Russell is doing is raising some questions here, philosophical questions, that have to do with our ordinary experience. They're not sort of on the surface. They don't seem to be very deep questions. They're questions about our relationship with the ordinary things that we meet in the world, in our experience, physical things, physical objects. And he's raising questions about what we actually can say about our experience, and especially what we can say that we know about those physical objects. So thinking about that opening question, is there any knowledge in the world which is so certain that no reasonable man could doubt it? I'd say that Russell, like the rest of us, goes about his ordinary experience in the world, and there are questions we have, doubts that we have about specific things, but one of the things that we don't doubt is sort of the ordinary things about physical objects, things that we take for granted. For instance, that they exist, and that we can know them, and that's exactly what he's trying to undermine in this opening chapter, raising questions, seeming to show that what seems to us to be certain and true and without controversy is in fact very puzzling. There are contradictions and problems that are latent in our experience, and that one of the things that philosophy does, and maybe the main thing that it does, is that it uncovers those puzzles. It makes the seemingly obvious not so obvious anymore. But let's get to a specific question. I mean, what exactly is he talking about here? What is an example of something that we think we know in our ordinary experience that upon further reflection maybe we don't know, or at least that we have to clear up some questions, theoretical questions having to do with knowledge and existence and being, before we can actually say that we know. Well, let's take an ordinary question like, what is the color of this table? He gives the example of the table that apparently he's writing at. What is the color of this table? I think, if we look at the table in front of us now, or any ordinary object, we would be able to say with some confidence what the color was. In fact, he looks at the table in front of him and says, well, it's brown. It's a brown table. But then on page, or I'll give you page numbers, then towards the beginning he says, as soon as we try to be more precise, our troubles begin. Although I believe that the table is really of the same color all over, the parts that reflect the light look much brighter than other parts, and some parts look white because of reflected light. I know that if I move, the parts that reflect the light will be different, so that the apparent distribution of colors in the table will change. It follows that if several people are looking at the table at the same moment, no two of them will see exactly the same distribution of colors, because no two can see it from exactly the same point of view. So what is Russell doing there? He's saying, well, there's an ordinary question about an ordinary thing. What is the color of something? And then if we begin to think about it, we realize that for most things that we actually experience, and there's no one color that a thing has. It may have what we judge to be a dominant color, but we realize that the color of something depends upon what part of it you look at and where you are in relation to the thing. And that moreover, different people from different points of view, or the same person successively taking different points of view, will see different colors on the table. And that the question, what is the color of the table, which at first seems pretty simple, pretty quickly upon reflection turns out to be more complex. And it's this question of color in relation to ordinary physical object that opens up the idea behind the title of the chapter, Appearance and Reality. He says, here we have already the beginning of one of the distinctions that cause most trouble in philosophy, the distinction between appearance and reality, between what things seem to be and what they are. So our little brief examination of the question of the color of the table has opened up a very large question of the distinction between appearance and reality. The table appears to me, depending on what point of view I have, depending upon the conditions of light and the conditions of me and all sorts of other conditions, to have a certain color or a certain collection of colors. And he talks about the table's shape, its texture, the way it feels, whether it's rough or smooth. And why is he doing this? Well, he's trying to make a certain distinction between our experience of something and what we think the thing actually is, and to make that distinction pretty clear. Let's take a look at I'll give you page numbers again anyway. But he says, but the other colors which appear under other conditions have just as good a right to be considered real, and therefore, to avoid favoritism, we are compelled to deny that in itself the table has any one particular color. That is, when we realize that the color of the table is something that depends more on us than anything else, or upon our relation to a thing, and not just on what the thing is in itself, we realize that a question of the color, or even the shape, or the texture of a physical object is a very difficult thing, because we know how the thing appears to us at any one moment, but we can't say for sure how the thing is in itself. So we have this distinction raised, or we have this idea raised of the distinction between how a physical object appears to us, which is varied, which depends upon us, as well as the conditions under which we experience the object, and presumably the object itself, as opposed to the way the object is in itself. Now, knowledge, we usually say, is of things in the world, and we have knowledge of things when our beliefs about those things are true. But what Russell is suggesting is that what we can actually experience, at least immediately or directly, are not those things in themselves, but the way those things appear to us. So once we've established that distinction, we have a very big problem. It says a little bit later on, thus it becomes evident that the real table, if there is one, is not the same as what we immediately experience by sight or touch or hearing. The real table, if there is one, is not immediately known to us at all, but must be an inference from what is immediately known. I think that is a very key passage there, and one that bears a lot of scrutiny on your part. The real table is not immediately known. Well, if it's not immediately known, how is it known? Well, if it's known at all, it's known mediately. That is, through a medium, not in itself. Now, Russell thinks that there are some things that we immediately experience, and those he calls later, and we'll talk about this, sense data. But the things that we think that we can make statements about, physical objects in the world, other people, anything in our external experience, are not sense data. They are independently existing objects. And if we can only know them immediately, that is through a logical inference, that is, we experience something from different points of view, and all those experiences lead us to believe that there must be a thing that is the cause or the origin of all those experiences. That is an inference. That is, it's made on the basis of our immediate experience of our sense data. So I hope that we get started here and some questions are raised. Before we move on, I'd like to do one more little lecture on this chapter, and especially to get straight Russell's distinctions between sensation, or the experience that we have when we're sensing, as opposed to sense data, or the object of that experience, and raising the question of the relationship of those things with physical objects in the world, or what he will call matter.